So I know we just got totally revved up, and I feel it's a little unfair to put me in front of a hometown favorite, but I'm going to try and do my best. I want you all to take a deep breath, and I want you to think about your favorite place. It could be a place that brings you, got a little ahead of myself. It could be a place that brings you joy, or makes you feel special, or just safe and comfortable. It could be something from your childhood, or someplace that's current to you now, or even an imagined place in the future. Now, whether you realize it or not, that place that you just thought of is a place that holds your story, or at least a piece of it. Every day, every moment of our lives, we are living out some sentence, some page, some chapter of our story. And I know in this uber digital age, we're so used to thinking of how we're Facebooking, texting, tweeting, the like, and how that means that our lives are pretty much occurring in the ephemeral space of the internet. But the truth of the matter is that there is always space. And that space is always playing a role in our story. Now, I'm an architect, and often when I tell people that, one of the first things they ask is, what kinds of buildings do I do? And that's always been a really complicated question for me to answer because it's not the lens through which I see my work. I view my calling as creating and shaping spaces that help people live their best stories. Now, over the years, as I've done this work, I've realized that for those of us with privilege, there's an abundance of spaces that help us do that. My work has been focused on people for whom the opposite is true. Communities that are surrounded by spaces that are barely helping them to survive, let alone thrive. Spaces that barely acknowledge that they have stories worth living, let alone value them. I'm talking about substandard low-income housing, vacant lots in distressed neighborhoods, or the streets in which many of the homeless in this country call home, even though they were never designed or built to be homes for anyone or anything. I wanted to tell you the story of one of the projects that I've been involved with, but rather than me starting it off, I wanted to let the residents of that community do so.
We have always been set aside like an island, a no man's island. We're right here in Baby Hunters Point, where the old power plant used to be, something that I grew up with. And going to reminisce about what this is all about, what Hunters Point is all about, and what the people was all about.
What do you want for the future?
What I want to see in the future is my grandchildren being productive citizens. I want them to go to school, to get educated, and to place themselves in the position so that they may help others.
Joy is a result of having a strong sense of who you are, the direction you're going in life, and your overall purpose. By helping others, combining education and community service, communities are healed and streets are healed.
If we think about our history and all we lost, we didn't lose it for nothing, and all of what we do is not in vain. I'm proud to serve this community. I want to see the change, but I also want to see our culture preserved here and our families preserved here. We look out and we see just this space, and the water comes up to the land, and just makes me think of how important it is to preserve our beauty. I don't want to waste time wishing that I did something or said something. To wake up today and be alive and tell you I love you. This is a time for us to talk.
And for us to be here today looking out on the outpost of the beginning of Hunters Point, it's future. This is where the future is, and it will be a success story.
Thank you. So, as you might have gleaned from the video, the site on which this project is located is an old power plant site in the neighborhood called Bayview Hunters Point, which is located in the southeastern quadrant of San Francisco. It's a historic working-class African-American community, and this power plant had been up for almost a century when in the late 90s, a group of mothers living in the public housing on the hill above the plant led a community group to fight for its closure. They were successful. The utility company finally tore down the plant, remediated the land, cleaned the soil, put in clean soil, and then capped it with asphalt. Two important points to take away are that it's a 30-acre site of asphalt, and it was going to be at least 5 to 10 years before any development could happen here. So the utility company commissioned myself and 2 other firms to program that site with interim uses that could serve as a community benefit. And that listening booth that you saw in the video was our first installation. It actually came out of conversations that we had in the community where people talked about the fact that stories were being lost because of displacement, people leaving voluntarily, or simply dying of old age. It was done in partnership with StoryCorps, and all the audio that you heard on the video was actually from the StoryCorps recordings. That installation was really successful, and built on the backs of that, we partnered with local organizations, residents, and the utility company to do a whole suite of programming. We've done everything from job training workshops to an annual circus to even a new shoreline trail that just opened up a year ago, and I'm happy to say has become a place of pride in the community. In the 5 years that we've been operational, over 20,000 people have come and done something on this site that we hope has helped create joyful and meaningful memories that they can add to their stories. Now, I could stop here and just leave you with the glow of this super inspiring and cool project, but then that would be leaving you with an incomplete story. Because even though we've had these amazing moments of joy, particularly Black joy, it doesn't mean that there also hasn't been a lot of moments of loss, particularly Black loss. And unless we're willing to hold space for both, even if it's not necessarily always connected to our site, but connected in the neighborhood, which is the context in which we're operating in, this project will just exist as disconnected moments of feeling good, as opposed to sustained opportunities for impactful change. We have to see that wider story. For me, this call came loudly about 6 months ago. There was a community meeting. The utility company was finally ready to talk more concretely about long-term plans here. That meeting could best be described as a disaster. Pretty much imagine your worst community meeting, and this was it. There was a lot of yelling and anger at the utility company for fear that if they sold it to a developer, we were just going to see luxury condos, which had been the pattern of every other developer in this neighborhood. There was anger at the city because in the decades of disinvestment, people were wondering why they still hadn't seen more jobs and resources here. I believe that we often talk about the anger that we see at these meetings as those are naysayers or agitators. And it's true, some people do use those meetings as platforms, but that doesn't negate the validity of the anger that they show. That anger is, as poet Nir Wahid says, grief that has been silent for too long. And so when I stood back and looked at what I saw in that meeting, I realized that I was witnessing pain. In this community, that pain had a long arc, from residents living in a community of environmental injustice, where there are still stories coming out about the naval shipyard and the toxic waste. This community is located in a gleaming city that calls itself headquarters to Twitter and Airbnb, yet they have one of the lowest per capita income, highest unemployment, and highest incarceration rates. And they are seeing a push of gentrification that is rapidly redefining this neighborhood. All of that is causing pain. I don't believe that that story is unique to Bayview Hunters Point. We see it all over in the Bay Area, see it all over the country. And Sandre just talked about it, you see it here in Pittsburgh. And I believe that many of us are here because we believe that we want to do something about it. But I want to talk about what it means to think about how we do good and how we do better, because I think we need to change that up. For those of us in the room who started with less or have been harmed, either because of the color of our skin, the wealth of our parents, or the place of our birth, I want you to know that if that connects to your story, I see you. And I think that we need to continue to show up as our beautiful and authentic selves, to believe in our right to be here, and when we feel safe to do so, to show our pain. Because while we can be angry and frustrated, we still need to figure out how to start our own healing. And for those of us in the room who came in with a little bit of power and privilege, we also need to have a reckoning. Because that good that we're trying to do, it's not really going to work if we don't, as author Anand Giridharadas says, do less harm. We can talk about the awesomeness of the technological future that waits us, and I know that we talk consistently, or try to, about how advancement has been unevenly distributed. But it seems to me that while we're talking a lot about the access that we're going to bring, we're not also talking about all those things that we're simultaneously doing over here that are decreasing access. There's some guilt and complicity that we need to do our work around, because if we don't, all the money, technology, and policy that we try to throw at this problem will just exist as inadequate bandages placed over the emotional pain connected to our physical wounds. I want all of us in this room to commit to the idea that if we are to propel ourselves from where we are now to where we hope to go, that we have to step up and be courageous. We have to hold space for acknowledging and listening to each other's pain, including our own. We have to create authentic and intentional spaces for grieving. And we need to commit to a sustained and perhaps even lifelong process of healing. Last week, I found myself in a conference talking about loss. It was a conference to reimagine the end of life. And that's mostly because once you start nerding out on grief and healing, it really is a short walk to talking to people about death. One of the things that was interesting is that many of those in attendance had a deep and abiding acceptance that death was inevitable. But they also equally believed that the way in which we approached it didn't have to be so as well. Change is inevitable. In many of these places, the train has left the station. But I refuse to believe that harm is inevitable, that guilt and complicity is inevitable, or that injustice is inevitable. We need to get down and dirty with our pain, grief, and healing. That is our work to do. I don't know where that winding road is going to take us, but I do know that it is not optional. Not if we want to figure out how to break the loop of injustice and to create more loving spaces in which all of our stories are valued. Thank you.